art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good gifts and giver of life, come and abide in us, and cleanse us of all impurity, and save our souls, O good one.
Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 sets of saints tonight. Saint Simeon the Starlight, Saint John the Faster, Simeon being commemorated yesterday, John being commemorated today, and Saints Anthony and Theodosia of the Kiev Caves, who are among the commemorations in the liturgy that get commemorated in the church, which so we have a little more information about them. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Oh, he goes first.
Okay, and you are covering
Saint Simeon.
Saint Simeon. He is an interesting saint.
Here's an icon.
Should we pass it around?
Yes.
There's his mother. Well, this is coming up to try and visit him.
And this is a modern map. He was born in Sis, which is now Kozan, which is here.
Which is now where?
It's Kozan in
Oh.
Turkey. And this is a region called Afrin, and that's where it wasn't called that back then. But his pillar is around here. And there's a, we want to take a look at that. And here's an old Roman map, which it was that portion where he was born was called Cilicia. You know, it's right on the border of Turkey and Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a larger map, so you see in the Mediterranean zoomed out. And this is what's left of his pillar, right there.
Oh,
There's still some left.
That's the base of the pillar, and they put some block on it.
Wow.
That's how narrow it was,
Yeah.
very narrow. And here's another picture of the complex.
was that there during his life?
Yes. Well, I don't know how built out it was, but
There was a monastery?
yes. Saint Simeon the Stylite was born in the Cappadocian village of Sisan, of Christian parents. Sisocian and Martha. At 13 years of age, he began to tend his father's flock of sheep. He devoted himself attentively and with love to this, his first obedience. Once after he heard the Beatitudes in church, he was struck by their profundity. Not trusting to his own immature judgment, he turned therefore with his questions to an experienced elder. The elder readily explained to the boy the meaning of what he had heard. The seed fell on good soil, and it strengthened his resolve to serve God. When Simeon was 18, he received the monastic tonsure and devoted himself to feats of the strictest abstinence and unceasing prayer. His zeal, beyond the strength of the other monastic brethren, so alarmed the igumen that he told Simeon that to either moderate his ascetic deeds or leave the monastery. Saint Simeon then withdrew from the monastery and lived in an empty well in the nearby mountains, where he was able to carry out his austere struggles unhindered. After some time, angels appeared in a dream to the igumen, who commanded him to bring back Simeon to the monastery. The monk, however, did not long remain at the monastery. After a short while, he settled into a stony cave, situated not far from the village of Galasamnisa, and he dwelt there for 3 years, all the while perfecting himself in monastic feats. Once he decided to spend the entire 40 days of Lent without food or drink. With the help of God, the monk endured his strict fast. From that time, he abstained from food completely during the entire period of the Great Lent, even from bread and water. For 20 days he prayed while standing, and for 20 days while sitting, so as not to permit the corporeal powers to relax. A whole crowd of people began to throng to the place of his efforts, wanting to receive healing from sickness and to hear a word of Christian edification. Shunning worldly glory and striving again to find his lost solitude, the monk chose a previously unknown mode of asceticism. He went up a pillar 6 to 8 feet high and settled upon it in a little cell, devoting himself to intense prayer and fasting. Reports of St. Simeon reached the highest church hierarchy in the imperial court. Patriarch Dominus II of Antioch visited the monk, celebrated divine liturgy on the pillar, and communed the ascetic with the holy mysteries. Elders living in the desert heard about St. Simeon, who had chosen a new and strange form of ascetic striving. Wanting to test the new ascetic and determine whether his extreme ascetic feats were pleasing to God, they sent messengers to him, who in the name of the Desert Fathers were to bid St. Simeon to come down from the pillar. In the case of disobedience, they were to forcibly drag him to the ground, but if he was willing to submit, they were to leave him on his pillar. St. Simeon displayed complete obedience and deep Christian humility. The monks told him to stay where he was, asking God to be his helper. St. Simeon endured many temptations, and he invariably gained the victory over them. He relied not on his own weak powers, but on the Lord himself, who always came to help him. The monk gradually increased the height of the pillar on which he stood. His final pillar was 80 feet in height. Around him a double wall was raised, which hindered the unruly crowd of people from coming too close and disturbing his prayerful concentration. Women in general were not permitted beyond the wall. The saint did not make an exception even for his own mother, who after long and unsuccessful searches finally succeeded in finding her lost son. He would not see her, saying, "If we are worthy, we shall see one another in the life to come." St. Martha submitted to this, remaining at the foot of the pillar in silence and prayer, where she finally died. St. Simeon asked that her coffin be brought to him. He reverently bid farewell to his dead mother, and a joyful smile appeared on her face. St. Simeon spent 80 years in arduous monastic feats, 47 years of which he stood upon the pillar. Many pagans accepted baptism, struck by the moral staunchness and bodily strength which the Lord bestowed upon his servant. The first one to learn of the death of the saint was his close disciple Antony. Concerned that his teacher had not appeared to people for 3 days, he went up on the pillar and found the dead body stooped over in prayer. Patriarch Mardonius of Antioch performed the funeral before a huge throng of clergy and people. They buried him near his pillar, at the place of his ascetic deeds. Antony established a monastery upon which rested the special blessing of St. Simeon. We pray to St. Simeon for the return of the church of those who have forsaken her or have been separated from her.
I've never heard that.
He is also the first, and it kind of says that, he's the first monk or ascetic to climb up on a pillar and dwell there. And after he did it, a whole bunch of others started following suit. So there's the stylites are kind of a class of monastic saints. There's 23 pages of his life in the September volume of the Lives of the Saints The Great Collection of the Lives of the Saints by Saint Dimitri Rostov, this has been translated in English. And it's published by, I think it's Chrysostom Press, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah, Chrysostom Press in Missouri. That just skims over, that account that Seraphim read just skims over the various miracles that he worked. He was visited by all kinds of people from every country, Persians, Saracens, all kinds of people who, when they came in contact with him, were struck by it. And as it says there, many of them converted.
So that's why he's prayed to reunite people with the church.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, His Holiness.
Yeah. Did that give his age when he died?
No.
Um,
Was it a monk for 80?
Saint Dimitri Rostov, in his life, says he died at age 123.
Another old one.
He's very old. But there's some question about how much time he spent on the pillars, because it wasn't just one pillar. It started out at 6 feet, and then he increased that to 12, and then it went up higher to 30 some feet, and went up higher beyond that. And
Were
then
they in
ended up-
different locations, or were they all near this one box?
they're all near the same place. And how tall was the final pillar?
About 80 feet.
About 80 feet. And there was a little hut that was 3 feet wide up there, which is where he lived.
Another account said his first attempt at just staying in one place and praying like that was in a craggy cliff
Right,
in a mountain, and its name's Simeon Mountain now.
right.
Some of the accounts that I got, though, they had all these comments by unbelievers. You know what I mean? So I picked one that was pious.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that the remains of the monastery and such were heavily damaged by the Syrian conflict, with both the Russians and the Turks bombing it.
I'll be right back. The recent conflict?
Yeah, 2016 or whatever it was.
Okay.
And there's a picture which now won't let me see because of the
The broadcast?
well, the website, like, oh, you need to sign in, whatever. So I won't look. I saw brief clips of it, and then it locked it away. Anyways, it showed like a gigantic, like a crater next to the remains of the pillar.
But the pillar was still there.
Yeah, but the little rock on top had been knocked off.
Okay.
Interesting. Pillars still remained.
But some
Despite being
60% of the site has been
Yeah, 'cause
Destroyed.
destroyed.
the largest city close to that is Aleppo, and that's, you
Yeah.
know, that was a mess.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes,
There's a big conflict there.
And apparently, as of 2020, the Turks have been occupying.
Right.
Which, if you think about it, the reason I brought it up, in our recall, is like the monastery, from what I could tell, was built up, at starting at the beginning of his life, and for several hundred years before being abandoned. But a large portion of it remained to this day, and it's
Mhm.
only with this relatively recent.
Was the monastery occupied by monks, the Christian monks, through the centuries down to the modern times?
I don't know when it was abandoned. I can't. I'd have to look up some more.
Those
But
pictures that Seraphim had looked
That
like
looked
they
like
were more
ruins.
like ruins.
Those were like-
they are ruins. I don't know when it would probably. I mean, I don't know. If I were to make a guess, it would be short after the Turks conquered Byzantium that eventually it's Syria, so I don't know.
Shows being overrun by somebody.
Well, that area was occupied by Muslims for
Yeah.
centuries.
I don't think they ever turned it into a mosque, unlike a lot of other ones.
No, they left a lot of the Christian sites either intact and abandoned or in ruins. There are churches, especially in caves throughout Cappadocia, which is in Turkey, that remain to this day.
So why a pillar?
Well, in the life from St. Dimitri, people were crowding in and touching him,
Mhm.
and that was disturbing his asceticism. His whole asceticism was basically stand motionless. And so his first attempt was, well, I'll just raise myself up, and then they can see me, but they can't touch me. And 6 feet apparently wasn't enough.
The throngs of people and the noise and all the other bustling.
Yeah.
Because it seems like you'd still hear.
Well, he was constantly talking to people.
Right.
It does say there in the life that Seraphim read, his disciple Anthony, I think it was, went and found him dead because he had not come out of his hut for 3 days to give a talk to the people or to answer questions and settle disputes. He did all of that. In St. Dimitri's life, it says that he would stand praying through the night, and then he would, I forget what, he would do that till like the 9th hour. From the 9th hour, he would then talk to people for 3 hours or so, and then he would go back and into his hut and continue praying.
So we spent a lot of time talking to people, despite wanting to get away from them.
Yeah, well, he was giving instruction. He was talking to all of these unbelievers and pagans and whatnot, heretics.
Presumably converting people.
Yeah, he was settling disputes between people.
Which is interesting.
Well, they came to him as an arbiter. So all of that was done during those times, and then he didn't come out. Now, during Lent, he would stay the whole week in the hut. And after that first time of not eating during Lent, then every Lent beyond that, he would fast the whole of the time.
And he also convinced Emperor Theodosius II in Evdokia to accept the Council of Chalcedon.
Right, that's right. Evdokia in particular had fallen sway of the Monophysites, I think it was, and he sent word to her and to the emperor, get back into the church because you're out of it, essentially. And he had sufficient stature at that point that they were afraid. I think they also had a vision or something in a dream, and then they came down. But he wouldn't see Eudocia because he didn't allow women.
Right.
And there was a Saracen woman of nobility, and she was childless, so she sent word asking for his prayers that she conceived, and she did. And she was bringing the child to him, and then she realized, oh, I can't go there. So she sent the child forward with somebody else to say, here's the fruit of your prayers, and he blessed the child.
Wow. Also said there was a liturgy up there.
Yeah, that would have been a tight spot. There was more than one liturgy. This one talks about the patriarch.
Right.
The patriarch of Antioch, the patriarchs, the different patriarchs came and visited him multiple times.
And there's so many records of it. That's the thing, that this one Roman Catholic writer is saying, this sounds like fantasy, but there's just too much evidence.
Yeah.
When he died, the patriarch came with 2 other bishops from Antioch, and the 3 of them conducted the funeral. I think St. Demetrius said, I think they did it up above on the pillar. But that night, I might have misread that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all fit.
But there was a whole bunch of people who came. His fame spread throughout the world. Okay, Longin.
And next, St. John the Faster. My printer ran out of ink, so I'm going to have to refer to this for everyone.
I have something here if you want.
Okay. I have.
It's also on the back.
Yeah, that's a word. Thank you. It's the same as this. St. John the Faster.
Oh,
I don't like making disposable items.
Now we're gonna put that up on the wall. Thank you.
Do we get to keep these?
Yes.
Thank you.
Showing up.
Thank you. This is an interesting guy. He had a little bit of controversy in his life, as well as doing some things that are still in use today, I believe, by priests. Let's start here. He's commemorated on September 2nd. He's, get to the right one here. He was born in Constantinople. His parents were artisans. He worked as a goldsmith up until his teen years, or early teens. And under Patriarch John of Constantinople, he was made a deacon at the Hagia Sophia Church. He was really famous for him being a really strict ascetic. His ascetic life, which is how he earned the name John the Faster. He fasted almost continuously. He became a pretty important person among the clergy of Constantinople. And at the Patriarch's death, Patriarch, I don't want to mispronounce his name,
Eutychius.
Euthymius, okay, thank you. He was made Patriarch by Emperor Tiberius II. One of the things that brought him a little bit of fame as well was prior to the evening of the Pentecost, the fast of Pentecost, there was a horse show at the Hippodrome, and it kept people, they went there instead of church.
It was horse races.
Yeah.
The Hippodrome is famous or infamous for the horse races, and that's where,
The gambling takes place.
and the residents of Constantinople were typically organized into two groups, the Greens and the Blues. And in the time of the Emperor Justinian, there was a riot between them, and over some of his policies.
What made you green and what made you blue?
I don't remember exactly. I just remember that they were the Greens and the Blues. These were the two factions that would bet, and they were like
Sports
Well, it
team.
sounds like a
Sports teams.
sports team.
Gotcha.
Greens gets blue.
yeah, and they often resulted in a conflict in the streets of Constantinople and riots and so forth.
When he got word of this, or figured out why there was nobody, why his flock was not in attendance, he went into fervent prayer, and a thunderstorm came up and basically washed out the event. Big hail and everything, and the people came to realize that maybe they should have gone to church instead.
Yeah.
It was a bad hailstorm too. And then some stuff about Patriarch Gregory, but it's not. One of the things that he is actually, what he's still known for is he came up. St. John the Faster is famed in the Orthodox Church as the compiler of a penitential nomicon. Is that correct? Am I saying that correct?
Nomicon, yes.
Okay. Which is a law or canon of penances, which has come down to us in several distinct versions, but their foundation is one and the same. This is an instruction for priests on how to hear a secret confession of secret sins. This be a sin already committed or constituting merely a sin of intent. Ancient church rules address the manner and duration of public penances established for obvious and evident sinners, but it was necessary to effectively adapt these rules for the secret confession of undetected things being repented of. St. John the Faster, because of this, he issued his penitential nomicon, or canonatia, so that the good intentioned confession of secret sins, unknown to the world, already testifies to the disposition of the sinner and his conscience in being reconciled to God. And therefore the saints shortened the penances which were originally
Lengthy.
done by the ancient fathers by in some cases half or more.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he set more exactly the character of the penances: severe fasting, daily performing of an established number of prayerful prostrations, distribution of alms, etc. The length of the penance is determined by the priest. The main purpose of the Nona Canon is compiled by the Holy Patriarch, consists in establishing penances not simply by the measure of the sins, but by the measure of admitting the confessed, and through the appraisement of penitence, not continual punishment, but through the extent of the experience to be confessed, one's spiritual state.
Mm-hmm.
Are those still in use?
Yes, I mean, it still exists. They've been superseded. Archbishop Anthony of Los Angeles, in talking to a clergy conference in 1985, mentioned that the church in Russia in the 1920s, or just before, well, maybe just before the revolution, had said no penance should be longer than 2 years. So they were cutting them 10 and 20-fold.
Oh, gotcha. They were just adding to it.
Yeah, the point being that if you keep the strictness that the fathers of, say, the apostolic canons, you'll kill the soul. They'll go into despair.
It continues among the Greeks and afterwards in the Russian church. The rules of St. John the Fast are honored on a level with other saintly rules, and the canons of his book are counted. And they're called applicable for all the Orthodox Church. A monk, Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, included him in the Greek handbook for priests.
The rudder.
Yes. First published in 1796, the Rudder book, published by him in 1800. The first Slavonic translation was done by, quite possibly, wholly equal to the Apostles and Methodios, and at the same time as he produced a Nona Canon and 50 titles of the Holy Patriarch John Scholasticos, whose successor on the Constantinople Cathedral seat was St. John the Faster. This ancient translation was preserved in the Ustig Ruder, published in 1902, so about 102 years later.
So the canons of St. John the Faster are considered universal, along with the
Greek and
councils
Russian.
and the other fathers.
And 16th century in the Russian Church was circulated the Nona Canon of St. John the Faster in another redaction, compiled by priests, monks, and clergy at Mount Athos. In this form, it was repeatedly published in 1620, 1624, 1629. In Moscow, the penitential Nona Canon was published in the form of a supplement to the Book of Needs, or the Trebnik, under Patriarch, I want to say Joseph, if it's wrong, Joasaph, in 1639, and under Patriarch Joseph in 1651, and under Patriarch Nikon in 1658. The last edition since that time invariably is printed in the large Trebnik, a scholarly edition of the Nona Canon with parallel Greek and Slavonic texts, and with detailed historical and canonical commentary was done
That
in
sounds like a huge
1897.
book.
Yeah. So you don't need to give any more of the history of the publishing of it. His works are definitive. There are a couple of other things about him. Even when he was a layman and working as a goldsmith, there was a monk, Eusebius, Palestine, who came and stayed with him. And they were walking down the street in Constantinople, and the monk heard a voice telling him not to walk on the right of John because of his future. And so that impressed the monk. It was also in part because of Eusebius and some others that he wanted to become a monk. He refused the patriarchate originally. They wanted to make it, they wanted to make him patriarch. He said no. And then he had a vision of angels who threatened to punish him for refusing.
Yeah, he refused it several times before they finally said, those angels came down and said, look,
Yeah.
you need to do this.
He's another one of the monks. Well, he's the faster. He ate only once a week, and he would sleep sitting much like what St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco did. He wouldn't lay down. You mentioned the storm at Eve of Pentecost. He's probably most notable beyond that for being the first patriarch of Constantinople to use the title of ecumenical patriarch.
There was a little bit of controversy behind it too.
Well, yes, Pope St. Gregory the Great refuted that, saying that no bishop could claim to be the bishop of the whole world. Which the Roman Catholics downplay that. So the
So-
Patriarch of Constantinople has continued using the title ecumenical patriarch to this day.
Did
And
Saint,
they have now started imposing upon it the sorts of theory that St. Gregory was writing against, which the patriarchs of Constantinople claim to have universal jurisdiction.
so did Saint John the Faster, is he the one that called himself ecumenical?
Yes, he was the first one to use that title.
Why?
He was, he called a council of, I think it was a priest of Antioch, they called him to Constantinople for a trial, ecclesiastical
Great.
trial. Yeah, and there's some question about his authority to do that, because Church of Antioch is an autocephalous church, it's got its own patriarch. Why is Constantinople hearing the case? And I think that was one of the things that Pope Gregory specifically identified. Originally, Pope St. Gregory was a supporter of John because he'd been the representative of Rome in Constantinople. He knew the man, he respected him as the faster, this miracle worker. But he didn't like the use of the claims of Constantinople, especially since Constantinople at that point in time was still a relatively new patriarchate. It did not have an apostolic foundation. It was created at the time of, I think, the First Ecumenical Council.
So I thought there were 5 patriarchs right from the beginning.
No.
Oh,
Constantinople did not exist as Constantinople in apostolic times. It did exist as the city of Byzantium, which is why it's called the Byzantine Empire. It became Constantinople with Constantine the Great when he chose that city and built it up, and especially its walls. Well, he didn't build the walls, but he chose it for its strategic location as a defensible position and made it the capital of the Eastern Empire. At that point, the church under Constantine and the other emperors under their influence said the Bishop of Constantinople needs to be first after Rome, the old capital, and that's how Constantinople got erected and made it its position. So Rome is the capital of old Rome, of the old capital of Rome, and it is first among equals. Constantinople is the capital of New Rome, and hence it's the second see, and then Alexandria and Antioch and Jerusalem. But even originally, Jerusalem was a suffragan of Caesarea, the Archbishop of Caesarea in Palestine. It was not even an archbishopric, it was just a bishopric. But again, I think it was the first council that said, well, actually it was even before the first council, they said Jerusalem being the site of all the holy places, and in honor of, that's where the Lord walked, should have honor. And so for a time, even though it was the suffragan of Caesarea, the Bishop of Jerusalem had precedence before his archbishop. And that was a situation that couldn't endure because it's out of order. And so they elevated Jerusalem to a patriarchate.
what about walking on his right, not walking on his right? What's that?
Walking on the right, standing to the right is the position, place of honor.
Mm.
If you look at how clergy will line up, especially bishops, the senior bishop will be on the right.
Mm.
Or if you have multiple bishops, the most senior bishop will be in the center, the next one will be to his right, the next one will be to the most senior's left, and alternating as they move out. And of course, the right hand is always the dominant and the place of honor. Anything else on John the Faster?
No, that's it. He was,
What year or what century was this? I forget.
5th century, or 6th century. He was patriarch from 582 to his death in 595.
Monastery
Saints Anthony and Theodosius.
of the caves.
Yes. This is Saint Anthony on the right, on the left, and Saint Theodosius on the right,
Our left and right as we look at it?
as you look at it.
Okay.
Yes, well, Saint Anthony was the elder of the two. Our venerable Father Anthony of the Kiev Caves was one of the founders of the monastery of the Kiev Caves. His feast day is on September 2nd with Saint Theodosius, and on July 10th, when an appearance of the Mother of God foretold his impending death. Anthony was born in 983 in Lubek, near Chernigov. He was named Anthimus by his parents. In his youth, he possessed a fear of God and dressed in monastic attire. As he matured, he set off on a journey to Mount Athos, where he took to the monastic life. He received a monastic tonsure with the name Anthony, and set his life on a course of pleasing God and living an ascetic life on the path to virtue. He became known for his humility and obedience. In time, the igumen recognized in him a great future ascetic. Inspired by God, the igumen directed that Anthony should return to his homeland, where many monks would come to him. Returning to the Russian lands, Anthony visited many monasteries near Kiev, but was not able to find the strict life that drew him to Mount Athos. In time, he came upon a cave near the village of Berestovo. Here he began his struggle in prayer, vigil, work, and fasting, eating only a morsel a day, and sometimes not eating for a week. In his ascetic life, people began to come to him for his blessing and counsel. Some who came decided to stay with him. Anthony's renown spread throughout the land, inspiring many to the monastic life. After 12 men had gathered with Anthony, the brethren dug a bigger cave, and within it made a church and cells for the monks. As the community became larger, Anthony appointed Barlaam as abbot, and then withdrew to another place to dig a new cave where he secluded himself. Nevertheless, monks began to settle around his new cave of seclusion. Thus were formed his new cave was called the Near Cave, and the Far Caves were the originals. Later, a small wooden church dedicated to the Dormition of the Theotokos was built over the Far Caves. Many miraculous happenings have been recorded associated with St. Anthony, including the appearance of the Mother of God before Saints Anthony and Theodosius in the Blacherne Church in Constantinople, without their leaving their own monastery, at which the Mother of God foretold the death of Anthony. He died on May 7th, 1073, and his relics, through divine providence, remain concealed.
Yeah, he told his monks that he did not want his burial site to be known. And so they honored that.
And it's stuck.
They presumably shut him up in one of the caves, but nobody's been able
Well,
to
they
find him.
did later use the caves for bones, for
Yeah.
graves.
But they shut him up in a way that nobody knows where his remains are.
Saint Theodosius. Our Venerable Father Theodosius of the Kiev Caves, along with Saint Anthony of Kiev, is considered to be founder in the 11th century of the Kiev-Pechersk-Lava.
That's the Kiev
monastery
Caves
of
one,
the Kiev
yeah.
Caves.
The Chersk is, it means caves.
And of monasticism in Russia. He brought Cenobitic monasticism to Kiev and Rus. His feast day is May 3rd. You know, Cenobitic monasticism is communal monasticism.
What's his name again?
Theodosius.
The kind of monasticism that Anthony was living both on Athos and then when he came back to Kiev and in those caves and so forth was eremitical, who were living as hermits.
The Venerable Theodosius was born in 1009. He grew up with his parents in Vasilkov and Kursk. His father was a judge. Theodosius was a pious and righteous youth, attending church every day and reading the scriptures attentively. His life was overtaken by love for God. He pursued a simple life and found pleasure working with the peasants, which was not consistent with the life his mother thought he should live. With the death of his father when he was 13, Theodosius began to consider the Lord's words, "He that loveth father and mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." Matthew 10:37. With the Lord's words in mind, he decided to leave his mother and to journey to Kiev to join the Venerable Anthony about whom he had heard. Upon meeting the young Theodosius, Anthony told him of the austere life that he led and that his cave was small and uncomfortable. Theodosius replied that the Lord himself had led him to Anthony and that he, Theodosius, would obey him in everything. Foreseeing his future greatness, Anthony accepted him and had him tonsured when he was 23 years old. As the cave monastery grew, Anthony moved to a new cave he had dug himself on a nearby hill, which became known as the Near Caves. He named Barlaam of Kiev as the new abbot. Theodosius remained with Barlaam at the Far Caves monastery. After Barlaam left the cave monastery for the Dmitriev monastery, Theodosius was elected Father Superior by his brother monks. In this position, he watched over the lives of the monks, and as a true leader, he set the example by sharing in the ordinary work of the community, carrying water, cutting wood, baking, and so on. He established near the monastery a shelter for the destitute and handicapped that was maintained by the monks using 1/10 of the monastery's income. With the growth of their community, Theodosius recognized the need for establishing rules for their community life. In establishing these rules, he looked to the community life of the Studian monastery in Constantinople and used the Studian rules as the basis for governing the community life in the Caves monastery. With emphasis on the duty of charity and common good, the rules served to revive the ideal of strict cenobitism and gave Russian monasticism its characteristic warmth. Theodosius maintained his independence from the many quarrels of the princes, and did not fear displeasure, though, if he felt called on to admonish them as a spiritual father. Even in the case of Prince Sviatoslav, whom he admonished for usurping the throne of his brother Iziaslav, Theodosius was able to maintain peaceful relations. Sviatoslav even gave the land for building a new church of stone. Neither St. Theodosius nor St. Anthony were to see the completion of this church. The Venerable Anthony reposed in 1073, followed by the Venerable Theodosius on May 3rd, 1074. Before his passing, Theodosius blessed his disciple Stephan to be placed in his abbot. Initially laid to rest in the cave, when in 1092 the monastery brethren transferred his relics to the new cathedral church, the abbot, accompanied by the monk Nestor, chronicler of the primary chronicle, discovered his relics to be incorrupt. In a solemn procession, the relics were transferred to the Dormition Cathedral on August 14, 1092. In 1106, the Venerable Theodosius was glorified and added to the list of canonized saints. The introduction of the Studian rule in the Kiev Caves Monastery has been considered to be St. Theodosius' greatest achievement. This rule would later spread to all Rus. He is considered today to be one of the first organizers of monasticism in the Church of Russia. He's also commemorated on August 28th with the synaxis of those whose relics repose in the far caves of St. Theodosius. Now, the lavra of the Kiev caves still exists after, of course, being closed down during the revolution and turned into museums and so forth. But it's been revived, and here is a picture of the Church of the Dormition. But sometimes you see a picture of that lavra and their cupola is inspired all over the place.
There's
There must
multiple
be
churches.
many churches
Yeah.
there. It's huge.
The Kiev Caves Lavra is the second, I think, leading monastery in Russian Orthodoxy. The first being the Holy Trinity, St. Sergius Lavra, outside Moscow. That is by far and away the premier one, and it was built on by many Russian princes and tsars. Kiev Caves, similarly, they had land given to them by Sviatoslav. They had other princes donate property, help build churches, donated vestments and church ornaments of various kinds. It seems like every generation the prince would come along and build a new church. So these monasteries become huge.
They also have many monks.
In pre-revolutionary Russia, these monasteries had thousands of monks. The Kiev Caves Lavra was upward of 3,000 monks at one point.
And it predates the Holy Trinity, doesn't
It
it?
predates the Holy Trinity because it dates from the 11th century. St. Sergius lived in, I think it was the 13th century. So it's by a couple hundred years. Then, of course, also at that point, the center of Russia was in Kiev. The Mongols come in and clobber Kiev, basically level it. And the metropolitan of Russia moved from Kiev first to Vladimir, and then after a generation moved to Moscow, which is what helped cause Moscow to become the city that it became, the center of the capital of Russia. So, yeah.
One of the things that you said, I think that he gave Russian monasticism its characteristic warmth.
Yeah,
Is that what it said?
yeah.
Could you expand on that to tell
Well,
me
he
what
was-
I don't understand compared to other monasteries or what?
Compare, the Russian monasticism is known for its warmth.
What does that mean?
It's a more intimate character than the Arab and Greek.
It's primarily Cenobitic for one.
Well, and it doesn't reject the neighboring villages and such. In general, the Russian monks would welcome and
Allow people to visit.
allow people to visit and stuff. Whereas, like, especially as opposed to the Hermitic monks, like we were just talking about, Simeon the Stylite, whose entire monasticism was trying to get away from people, so he could perform his monastic.
They do good work in the community.
Well,
But he was also considered the father of Russian monasticism because he established a rule when they needed one. And so he adapted the studium rule, and because of the way they functioned in their monastery, I think that's why they say that shows the characteristic warmth of Russian monasticism.
Well, don't forget that even when the monks went out into the wilderness, and this happened elsewhere, but what didn't happen is that in Russia, villages would grow up around these monasteries as the laity would come to the monasteries to be basically their spiritual center. They'd come into the monastery for the services. And but you can see this really at the Holy Trinity St. Sergius Posad. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and there's a whole city there now because of the people coming to be near the monastery. And the people, the laity would work at the monastery would support them and that kind of stuff.
Am I making noise? Sorry about that.
No problem.
That happened in the West too, especially with Benedict's monasteries. Mount Angel, for example, it was moving nothing. And the Swiss settled that in the late 1800s, and that community grew up around there, and there's a lot of people that were involved in various financial ways to support it.
Right.
It says that he adopted the rule of the monastery custodian, but it didn't give any description of what that really was.
I believe that's the monastic rule from, well, specifically Theodore the Studite,
Mhm.
from the Studios Monastery.
Mm-hmm.
I was also curious about it, so I looked up
And
what.
he wrote a Tychicon.
Right. It emphasizes cenobitic life, manual labor, and a carefully defined administrative hierarchy. That's about all I could find on it.
Monastic rules in the Orthodox Church were quite common. St. Gorgonius the Great, for instance, in Egypt. He's really the father of Cenobitic monasticism. And he created the rule of how do all these monks live together in peace and then be able to pursue their monastic life. Saint Saba in Palestine gave a rule. Saint Theodore gave a rule.
There's so many saints way out in the wilderness. Even
The great Lavra
in
Anathos
small
gave a rule.
places,
Yeah,
like even Neil Sorsky.
he gave a rule.
But I think there's a commonality between all the Eastern monasticism as compared to, like, specifically the Catholic. There's so many differing. The Catholic monastic orders are far more varied in terms of what they actually are in comparison to the Eastern Orthodox
Mhm.
ones, where they all follow a very similar structure.
Well, the Catholics make a division in their orders between
Right.
monks and friars.
Right.
And so the friars have a very different way of life. They all have a rule. You know, the Dominicans and the Carmelites and all those Franciscans, they have rules, but they don't live in a monastery, so it'd be a very different type of rule. I think the Benedictine rule is the basis for all the Catholic monks.
So that's pretty cool.
Benedict got his rule, at
Yeah.
least, at least in the essence of it, from Egypt. He spent time there. And then what he does is, in Benedict codifies all these different practices that the monks are supposed to follow. And I think that was it may not have been the only rule, but it was the premier rule in the West for a number of centuries. And the Benedictine rule, by the way, is thoroughly orthodox.
Actually, here's a quick comment I found just on Wikipedia, is that until the late Middle Ages, there was no mention of an order of Saint Benedict. It was more of just the way
The rule.
the rule for Western monasticism.
The order of monasticism in the Orthodox churches, I think I've said in a previous discussion, is novice, Rossifor monk, lesser schema, great schema. Those are the orders. Other comments, thoughts? What do you think about standing night and day for years on end, or not eating for 40 days, or fasting for a week?
Can't imagine it.
I imagine it takes a supremely extraordinary amount of grace to do that, to even consider it.
Well, in our modern times, in our modern days, he died, 55 years ago, St. John of Shanghai in San Francisco, during Great Lent, would only eat prospora from the services and drink holy water.
Wow.
When he came to San Francisco as Bishop of Western America, this would have been in 1962, he set up his residence in the St. Tikhon of Zdansk church, which it was, I think, a school or an orphanage or something. I think it may have been the orphanage. It's a building that sits, I think it's about 15th Street or 15th Avenue in San Francisco, near California. And there's a chapel on the main floor, and then off of the chapel there is a little office that has a chair in it. Now the chair was a padded chair, but it has a chair in it. And that was St. John's cell. And he would sit in that chair before an icon praying, and with whatever sleep he got, he was in that chair. He did the same thing in Seattle. There was a little room in the church hall in Seattle where he had a chair. It was he died in that room. He fell out of the chair. The people were below in the main hall, and they heard a thump, and they went up and they found him. So even in our day, there are people who can do it. But then if you look at pictures of St. John, he's very gaunt. Now I noticed this icon of St. John the Faster. He looks well nourished.
Yes, he does.
Oh, I was going to also mention, his life is also in the prologue, and it's also in St. Dimitri's. When St. John the Faster died, after his death, his only personal possessions were found to be a wooden spoon, a linen shirt, and an old garment.
Well, sometimes they don't always look gaunt.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a considerable radiance to the face, and of course the face is all you see because they're fully clothed,
Mhm.
so you don't know.
Right, that's exactly right. So what's this say to us about fasting?
They wear wusses.
We're pretty pathetic.
Well, what's the value of fasting?
Reducing attachment to the flesh.
Mm-hmm. Mortifying the flesh.
There's a sort of cleansing aspect.
Mm-hmm. It is much easier to pray when fasting than when full of food.
That's something I always notice when we have a service for Monday after lunch on Sunday.
Right.
It's just so different.
Yeah, it is. Well, what we call fasting is just abstaining from certain types of foods.
And quantity. We're
And
supposed to
quantity.
reduce
And
quantity as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
So compared to eating nothing, it's pretty,
Yeah, one
Or
of
just
them
roast for a
or just
one of them said was that, St. Simeon? He neither ate nor drank
Right.
For a week
Now
at
that's-
a time.
for Lent.
For like
Right.
the 40 days.
So that's just a miracle.
That is,
Yes.
that's
Because-
the grace of God.
People,
Yeah.
the
3
normal
days.
body can't.
3
survive
days
it.
without water.
Yeah.
Well, that's also interesting, in the life of Saint Simeon, where his pillar wasn't a lot, there was basically no water. And the people who are coming to him, who are outside the fence, they're starting to complain about how difficult it is to get water. So he tells them, go dig a hole in this cave, and water starts pouring out. So he tells them, dig a pit 9 feet deep or something like that to catch the water that's coming flowing out. And so a miraculous spring came up. But
To help.
it was for the people
For the people.
as opposed to
Yeah.
St. Simeon. He did not have hot and cold running water on his pillar.
Air conditioning.
Well, he did have air conditioning.
It was air conditioning.
The air blowing,
At night it was cool.
maybe.
During the day it was hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cold country in wintertime.
Yes, it is.
He didn't have like a fireplace up there or something like
Nope.
Gosh.
The icon shows it to be open because you can see him standing out there. But
Right.
the life of in Saint Dimitri said he built a hut, so I assume it had a
Very small, 3 foot.
Yeah,
So
but it
mine-
would have a roof
So
over
mine
it.
had a roof. Yeah.
So he slept like sitting or standing.
Sitting or standing.
Mhm.
You can't sleep 3 feet.
But he
But
stood.
you
He
curl
stood
up.
the whole
They stood
time.
the whole time.
Well,
He had a vision from a demon once where the demon says that Christ has said that you are worthy to come up into heaven, and I am sent with this chariot and all these angels to escort you up into heaven like Elias of old. And he was not particularly discerning, so he starts to put his foot forward and makes the sign of the cross, and immediately the whole thing vanishes. And so then he acknowledges, oh, this was a demonic vision, and he punishes the foot by standing on that foot only for a year.
goodness.
That would teach it.
It's never gonna get Oh,
I couldn't even stand on one foot during one liturgy.
I know.
yeah.
But we ought to think about taking our fasting seriously.
That was it. His life was a daily miracle. That's why we,
Well, yeah. It's that extraordinary grace.
Mm-hmm.
All of these saints were great fasters and ascetics.
Yeah, and, well, we have such grace too. We're weak when it comes to practice and fasting and things, but we're not without grace to strengthen us.
Well, that's for sure.
For one thing, we receive communion more than most of them did. They often didn't have priests in the monastery. Or,
No, at St. Simeon, how often did he take communion? It's when the patriarch came.
Yeah.
And didn't you say Anthony had the Hieromartyr tonsor Theodosus, which I don't remember. I don't think Anthony himself was a priest.
right, he had Nikon tonsured him.
And that was not uncommon. Many of the ascetic abbots never were more than simple monks. They always got somebody else to be ordained a priest. Well, who do you want to?
So next week, we're not having a class scheduled because we have the
Vigil?
liturgy.
Liturgy for the feast.
I think that was true.
Yes.
Oh,
That'd
I
be.
thought the calendar said we were having.
Oh,
Oh, do they?
maybe.
Did I appoint that?
It might have.
I don't have your calendar.
Yeah, because it's not the same day.
Yeah, I think the liturgy is on Tuesday, so maybe we are having.
It was on Monday.
Okay, well, then we'll be doing it on Tuesday. So who are the saints?
On Wednesday. We'll be doing
We'll
Wednesday,
do this on
Wednesday.
Wednesday, yeah.
well, it's
It would be
Joachim and Donna.
wouldn't it?
yeah.
Okay, well, that's clearly ones we should read their lives of. And who else among the commemorations would you want to know more about? I need to go get the
We have a
commemorations.
list of it?
Well, there was the ones, there was the Wonder Workers of Russia. There's that list.
Oh, yeah, that's my elders.
Let me go get the suggestions, because I don't remember them off the top of my head. I can say them when they come out in
Yeah,
order.
there's a bunch of them, and then it says, and all the other Wonder Workers of Russia.
Yeah, let me go get them.
I have Saints Anthony and Theodosius on the back of this medallion.
Oh, it's appropriate that you should talk
And
about
the medallion is of Great Martyr Barbara. I had a friend who went to Russia quite a few years ago on a pilgrimage, and she told me that she venerated the relics of St. Barbara at the monastery of the Caves.
Oh, wow.
It's not the entire relics,
Some part,
because we venerated some at Mediora in Greece too. So I wondered if that's why they were on the back of this medallion.
well, yeah, it's at their caves,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Well, but her relics were taken at there sometime before or after they were there.
Or would have, they mentioned that there were lots of relics and that the Soviets confiscated and got rid of a lot of them.
Oh,
Maybe sometimes they just packed them away and mocked them and disrespected them.
Okay, there's the Wonder Workers of all Russia: Michael, Peter, Alexis, Jonah, Philip, Hermogen, Macarius, Demetrius, Mitrophon, Tikhon, Theodosi, Joseph, Petrim, Innocent, and John.
Well, that's a list.
That's it.
So we're, I don't know if you could do the whole list, you could pick one, right?
They probably span a whole.
Well, these are not a single set. Each
Right.
one of them is a separate one.
Right.
And I'm not sure who specifically these are, but I might start with Michael. See what you can find out. Michael, the Wonder Worker of Russia.
So we've got Joachim and Anna, and Michael, the Wonder Worker of Russia. Olivia,
Probably.
yeah, probably.
Yeah, I'd have to look into it. There's another list of saints too. Anthony and Theodosius the Cave, Sergius of Rodnesh, Seraphim of Sarov, Job the Abbot of Wonder of Pichive, John of Kronstadt, Ksenia of Petersburg, Herman of Alaska, Paisi Velichkovsky, Ilya Makarius Ambrosi, and the other elders of Optina, Innocent of Moscow, Nicholas of Japan, John of Shanghai, and San Francisco. There's another list of Russian saints. So who wants to try to take that? I'll see what I can find out, if I can give you a little more pointing on which Michael that is, because Michael's a rather common saint's name. Actually, maybe it's in here.
I think it's Michael, Wonder Worker of Chernihiv. I think that's probably the one.
Well, the title of Wonder Worker isn't
No,
unusual, but
Prepodobny is a common
Cappadocia is just a monastic saint, isn't it?
Wonder Worker.
I thought
Yeah.
that was Chudovortz.
Chudovortz, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see, Chernigov.
Michael and Theodore.
Okay, that's probably it.
Are they related to each other?
Michael, the Prince of Chernigoff.
Theodore is his counselor.
Hmm.
Try that one.
St. Michael and
There's a list of saints in the back of the prologue from Oakwood, which is useful. And it's,
It's commemorated on September 20th, which is coming up not too far. I could that'd be on the old calendar.
September, oh yeah.
yeah, all of the dates given are church dates.
Which would be October 3rd, which is a Sunday. Yeah.
It's in the, yeah, let's do him. His life is in the, no, St. Dimitri of Rostov, his Lives of Saints. So, we'll do that.
Was Michael a wonderful?
Chernigoff.
If you just look up Michael and Theodore Wonder Workers, you'll probably find it. Or who's doing it. That's the question.
Yes, who's doing this?
Who hasn't done a saint yet?
I haven't done one yet. I can do him.
Thank you for volunteering.
Do you have that?
I think it was optional volunteering.
Do you have that book?
We don't have that book. I can get it. I can order
Borrow
it.
it.
I don't know how long it'll take to get, but
You can borrow mine.
hmm.
It's
You
also,
may need to extract from it because these lives can be multiple pages.
Okay.
there's a good one in there for Saints Joachim and Anna that we read in Sunday school a couple
Mhm.
years ago. It's not super long, but it's nice. It's more than what you'll read in the prologue.
Who wants to do Saints
Joachim and Anna.
Joachim and Anna?
You're a saint, you should do it.
Yeah. There you go.
There should do it.
Good volunteering. You should have no trouble finding a live of them. They're universal saints.
Well,
Okay, let me finish making my notes so I don't forget.
Everybody listening?
no, they'll be tuned in.
But they may,
They can check in later.
yeah, check in later.
We've had people look at them after the fact.
So we save it and then they can.
The guy in Montreal says it's kind of late for him.
Ah.
So he'll check
3 hours
it out.
ahead.
Yeah.
Guy in Montreal.
Yeah, he's been tuning into our streaming services.
Oh,
There's no church around. He can't cross the border. Can't go anywhere.
Is he a
This
person?
Canada.
Who is he, a parish person?
He's
Father Jonah knows them, right?
well, I know of him.
Oh, you know.
He was baptized in Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. He didn't go along with it.
Well, let's say a
Kind of
prayer.
stuck.
Let's say a prayer,
Yeah.
so we don't. Yeah. Have to close it down. Yeah. I'll have to read your prayer.
If it's truly be to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless and mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, you who without corruption gavest birth to God the Word, the very Theotokos thee do we magnify.
Thank you all.
does anybody want some of these?